The sky over Elk Ridge, Montana, burned a deep crimson as the sun dipped below the horizon. Pine trees cast long shadows over the gravel road leading out to the wilderness. In a town where nothing much ever changed, folks still talked about the disappearance of Tom Granger like it was yesterday. Tom wasn't just another guy. He was the kind of man people trusted, a rugged outdoorsman who could track a buck across icy trails and knew the woods like he knew the lines on his weathered hands. A local mechanic by trade and a father of two, he had a warm laugh, quick wit, and a reputation for keeping his word. When he vanished on a hunting trip in the fall of 2013, the entire town felt it like a punch to the gut. That October, Tom left town early on a Thursday morning, his Chevy Silverado packed with gear, a fresh thermos of coffee on the passenger seat, and his rifle nestled behind the front seat. He waved goodbye to his wife, Lauren, with a casual promise. Be back Sunday night with a 10-point buck. He never came back. The area he was headed to, Black Hollow Woods, was remote even by Montana standards. Hundreds of square miles of dense forest, sharp ridges and winding rivers. It's a place hunters love and GPS signals fear. When he didn't return by Monday morning, Lauren called the sheriff. A search team was dispatched within hours. They found tire tracks near an old logging road and traces of a campfire, but no truck, no Tom, and no signs of a struggle. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. The investigation ran cold after 3 weeks. They dragged the rivers, scoured the woods with dogs and drones, and even brought in a helicopter. Nothing. People whispered theories. Some said he ran off to start a new life. Others hinted at foul play. Lauren refused to believe he'd leave her and their 2 boys behind. She held on to hope for years until hope began to rust like an old rifle left in the rain. Then nearly a decade later, everything changed. It was late spring of 2022 when Deputy Craig Hansen got the call. A group of hikers had stumbled upon a rusted-out pickup in a dried-up riverbed deep within the woods, an area rarely traveled. The vehicle was badly overgrown with brush and vines, half sunk into the soft earth, as though it had been hiding there for years. The Montana plates were faded but readable. 4TG58. It was Tom Granger's truck. When the deputy pried open the door, the first thing he noticed was the smell, something sour and chemical, like dried blood and mildew. The interior was caked in dirt and moss. A hunting rifle lay on the floorboards, rusted stiff. But what stopped him cold was what, or rather, who, was in the driver's seat. The man was long dead. Judging by the clothing, he wasn't Tom. He wore a denim jacket over a tattered flannel shirt, both soaked in blood. His skull was fractured, and his jaw hung open like he'd died mid-scream. There was no ID, no phone, no wallet, just a name burned into the deputy's mind, not Tom Granger. News hit town faster than a lightning storm. After nearly 10 years, Tom's truck had resurfaced, with another man dead inside. Within 2 days, the case was reopened. Sheriff Dale Kinney, long retired, came in to help advise. But the man truly leading the charge was a quiet investigator who had built a reputation for solving long-dead cases. Special Investigator Samuel Rourke. Rourke wasn't the kind of man you expected to find in a place like Elk Ridge. Tall and sharp-eyed, dressed in a plain suit that seemed out of place against Montana's rugged backdrop, he arrived without fanfare. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Known for his relentless logic and empathy for the families of the missing, Rourke had solved cases others had long buried. He took one look at the crime scene photos and murmured, "Something's wrong. That truck was never meant to be found." Rourke began his investigation by walking the route Tom had reportedly taken in 2013. The same winding dirt road, now nearly washed out in places, led deep into Black Hollow. He met with Lauren Granger, who still lived in the same house, raising 2 teenage sons alone. She'd never remarried. "I knew he didn't run," she said, her voice firm. "He loved this family. He wouldn't just walk away." Her words stayed with Rourke as he examined every piece of evidence. Tom's gear, still inside the truck, showed no signs of panic or quick departure. His rifle was loaded. His cooler still held the cracked remains of old water bottles. But the mystery man in the driver's seat had no connection to Tom, not that anyone could find. DNA tests were ordered. A sketch artist helped recreate the stranger's face. Rourke pulled old case files looking for anything. A missing person, a criminal record, a family looking for answers. Weeks passed, then a break came. Rourke found an incident report filed just 3 months before Tom's disappearance. A bar fight, outside a roadside tavern called the Antler's Tooth. A man fitting the stranger's description had attacked Tom in the parking lot over a heated argument. Witnesses said it was about money. Others claimed it was personal. No one thought much of it at the time. The attacker's name? Jacob Mills. And Jacob had vanished around the same time as Tom. Rourke leaned back in his chair, flipping through the old black and white photos. One image showed Jacob glaring at the camera during his arrest, jaw clenched, eyes like a wolf's. Something in Rourke's gut twisted. This wasn't random. This was planned. But the question still lingered. If Jacob Mills was the man found dead in Tom's truck, where was Tom? Or more importantly, who had killed Jacob? And why had they left the truck buried for nearly a decade? Rourke knew then what he was dealing with wasn't just a cold case. It was a buried truth someone had worked very hard to keep hidden, and he intended to dig it all the way up. The morning air was crisp in Elk Ridge as Rourke stood at the edge of the dried riverbed, boots sunk into soft moss and eyes fixed on the rusted truck. He'd seen hundreds of crime scenes in his life, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the truck or the man inside. It was the silence that clung to the woods, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. The forensic team had finished their sweep, and the truck was towed to a secure facility behind the sheriff's office. Rourke insisted it stay exactly as it was found until he had personally examined every inch of it. He started with the outside. Mud caked the wheels, thick and black, which meant it had been driven into the riverbed deliberately. It hadn't crashed there. The driver had steered it into the wild, off the road, through miles of dense forest, and into a place so hidden, even satellite imaging had missed it. The doors were rusted shut when first discovered, but once opened, they revealed a different kind of story. The body, now confirmed by dental records as Jacob Mills, had been in the driver's seat. Blood had soaked through the floor mats and stained the seat below him. Based on decomposition, he'd died not long after Tom disappeared. What stood out most, however, was the angle of the skull fracture. According to the coroner's report, the blow had come from behind and slightly above, like someone taller had struck him while he sat defenseless. Murder, no question. But there was no trace of Tom's DNA in the front seat. None in the cab at all, actually. Rourke found that odd. If Tom had driven the truck, lived in it, packed it, there should have been at least a few strands of hair, skin cells, fingerprints. But it was as if he'd never been there. More intriguing was the back seat. Underneath the rotting upholstery and mouse droppings, Rourke found something strange. A folded flannel shirt tucked into the side panel. Inside it, wrapped tightly in plastic, was an old photo. Tom, his arm around a woman who wasn't Lauren. She was younger, blonde, and familiar. Rourke scanned it carefully. Her name came to him from the old report, Danielle "Danny" Moore, a bartender at the Antler's Tooth. Back in 2013, Danny had worked the bar the night Tom and Jacob Mills fought. She told deputies back then it was just two drunks squaring up. She said they both left angry, but nothing more. No one followed up. Rourke visited the tavern the next day. The Antler's Tooth hadn't changed much. Still smelled like beer and firewood. Locals played pool while a dusty jukebox pushed out old rock ballads. The new bartender pointed him toward a trailer park on the edge of town where Danny now lived with her boyfriend. Rourke knocked on the aluminum door. It creaked open after a pause, and Danny stepped out wearing a hoodie and jeans, her hair shorter but still blonde. She didn't recognize him but froze when he introduced himself. "I need to talk about Tom Granger," Rourke said plainly. Her face changed. Something flickered in her eyes, regret maybe, or fear. "I already told the cops everything back then," she said. Rourke handed her the old photo. "Then you won't mind helping me understand why this was hidden inside his truck." She stared at the picture for a long moment, then stepped outside and lit a cigarette. Her hands trembled slightly. "Tom and we had a thing," she said at last. "Before he disappeared. It wasn't serious. He said he was going to leave Lauren, but I didn't believe him. I told him to stop coming around. That's when Jacob found out." "Jacob Mills?" Rourke asked. She nodded. He used to come to the bar every week. Real intense guy. One night he saw Tom drop me off. Didn't like that. Started asking questions, threatening both of us. Rourke leaned in. Did you tell anyone this in 2013? I was scared. Sheriff Kinney back then told me to keep my mouth shut. Said stirring the pot wouldn't help anything. Rourke's expression hardened. Kinney told you that? She nodded again, eyes wide. Said it'd ruin Lauren's family more than it'd help. The retired sheriff had deliberately buried a lead. That meant one of two things. Either he truly believed Tom ran off, or he knew something deeper was going on. Back at the sheriff's office, Rourke confronted Kinney, who was helping catalog old evidence. The former sheriff looked older than his 63 years, tired but still sharp. You discouraged Danny Moore from giving a full statement in 2013, Rourke said flatly. Kinney sighed and set down the folder in his hands. I did. Thought it was a waste of time. Guy was gone, no proof of foul play. We had enough heartbreak without dragging a cheating scandal into the mix. But Jacob Mills was dangerous, Rourke snapped. You had a potential motive and ignored it. Kinney's jaw tightened. I made a call. It was the wrong one. You think I don't carry that weight? Rourke turned to leave, then paused. Tom never ran. Someone made him disappear. If you know anything more, now's the time. But Kinney said nothing. Later that night, Rourke went back to the truck and sat in the cab for over an hour. He tried to picture the scene. Jacob angry, maybe lured Tom out there. Maybe he planned to scare him, confront him. But something went wrong. Maybe Tom killed Jacob in self-defense and fled, hiding the body in the truck deep in the woods. But that didn't explain the lack of Tom's DNA, or the photo hidden away like a secret. It didn't explain the silence that followed for almost 10 years. He tapped the steering wheel lightly. What aren't you telling me, Tom? Suddenly, a new theory formed in Rourke's mind. What if Tom hadn't killed Jacob? What if someone else had? Someone who knew about the affair. Someone who had a reason to protect the Granger family's name? He stared into the pine trees beyond the window. This wasn't just a case of disappearance anymore. It was a web of betrayal, silence, and a town that had closed ranks to keep the truth buried. Lauren Granger hadn't spoken to the press since the discovery of the truck. Not once. She kept to herself, as she had for years, working double shifts at the diner and raising two boys who now resembled the man she lost. But when Samuel Rourke knocked on her front door, she opened it without hesitation, as if she'd been waiting. Her house was small, lived in. A wood stove crackled softly in the corner. Faded photographs of Tom lined the walls. His wedding photo, a framed snapshot of him teaching their boys to fish, one of him in his hunting vest, smiling beside a deer. I won't lie to you, Mr. Rourke, she said after a long pause, pouring him coffee. I prayed for years someone like you would come. She sat down at the kitchen table, her fingers curled around the cup. Her nails were short, unpolished. Her eyes, once vibrant, were rimmed with exhaustion and something else Rourke noticed. A weariness not just from loss, but from carrying a burden too long. Tell me about Tom's last day, Rourke said. From your point of view. Lauren nodded slowly. It was a Thursday, early October. Boys were already at school. He kissed me goodbye and said he'd be back Sunday. Same as always. He was excited. He'd scouted a spot up in Black Hollow. Said it felt lucky. Was he acting different? Nervous, maybe? Rourke asked. She hesitated. Number. Not that I saw, but I'd noticed him getting quiet that week. Distracted. I thought it was work, or maybe just life weighing him down. Did you know about Danny Moore? The silence that followed stretched between them like barbed wire. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Rourke didn't press. He waited. I suspected, she said finally. Tom was good at hiding things, but not from me. I found a receipt from the antler's tooth in his jacket. Late night. He never drank that late unless something or someone was pulling him there. You never confronted him. What would I say? That I knew. That I didn't want to lose him to someone who didn't even want to keep him. She looked away. He was a good man, Mr. Rourke, but he made mistakes. Doesn't mean he deserved what happened to him. Rourke studied her face. She was telling the truth. at least as much as she could. But something still felt off. "Do you believe he's dead?" "I do now," she said quietly. "But not because he ran, not because of that truck, because I know in my bones he never would have left me and the boys without a damn good reason." Rourke reached into his folder and pulled out the sketch of Jacob Mill's face, reconstructed from the remains. "Do you recognize this man?" Lauren's hands stiffened around the cup. Her pupils shrank. "Yes, he came by the house once, maybe a month before Tom disappeared. You never mentioned that." "No one asked," she replied almost bitterly. "He said he was looking for work. Seemed harmless. Something about him didn't sit right. But Tom said he knew him. They talked outside for a few minutes. Tom looked shaken afterward. He never told me what it was about." Rourke noted the timeline. Jacob showing up at Tom's home, the bar fight soon after, then the trip to Black Hollow. It wasn't coincidence. Jacob had been hunting something too. Not deer, leverage. He stood up, ready to leave. "If you think of anything else, call me. Even the smallest detail." She nodded and walked him to the door. As he stepped onto the porch, she called out quietly, "Do you think he suffered?" He paused. "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." Later that day, Rourke returned to the evidence room. With the help of Deputy Hanson, he reviewed everything taken from the truck, down to the scraps of paper, matchbooks, rusted coins. That's when something odd came up. Hanson held up a small, heavily corroded digital voice recorder. This was jammed under the back seat. Battery's long dead. It wasn't in the initial 2013 inventory because, well, no one ever found the truck. Rourke's heartbeat quickened. "Get it cleaned. We'll try to recover the files." It took most of the night, but by early morning the lab tech handed Rourke a flash drive. "There are only 2 playable audio files," she said. "One's corrupt. The other's just under 3 minutes." Rourke inserted the drive into his laptop, clicked the file, and listened. Click. A low hum of wind. Footsteps crunching on leaves. Then a voice. Tom's. "I don't know why you're doing this, Jacob. You already got what you wanted." Jacob's voice was faint, but clear. "Not everything. I told you, I want the rest. You show up at my house, threaten my wife, and think I'm gonna just hand it all over?" A sharp breath. "You're not walking out of these woods, Tom." A scuffle, then a loud crack, like bone hitting metal. The recording ended. Rourke sat back slowly, the weight of what he'd just heard pressing on his chest. Jacob had been the aggressor. He'd lured Tom out there. Maybe for blackmail, maybe for revenge. But it didn't add up. Tom clearly expected the confrontation, maybe even recorded it for protection. But the recording didn't capture a gunshot or a scream. Just one blow, one impact. And then, nothing. Which meant someone else had turned the tables. Someone had stopped Jacob, possibly killed him. But if that was the case, why leave Tom's voice recorder behind? Why bury the truck instead of burning it? Why go to such lengths unless Tom's disappearance had to be hidden? Rourke replayed the file, studying every word. There was tension, but not panic. Tom sounded cornered, but not afraid. In Jacob's voice, there was desperation there. Obsession. Suddenly the image of Sheriff Kinney came back to him. Older, tired, regretful. And then Lauren. Her calm, her poise. He knew what grief looked like. But hers? It was too practiced, too still. Rourke's next steps were clear. Re-interview Kinney. Visit the voice recorder's serial dealer. Trace where it was bought. And most importantly, dig into Tom Granger's financials. Because if Jacob Mills was after the rest, as he said on that tape, it meant Tom had something worth killing for. And somewhere in Elk Ridge, someone was still trying to keep that secret buried. The sky opened over Elk Ridge the next morning, washing the streets in a steady cold drizzle. Rourke stood outside the sheriff's office, coffee in hand, watching the raindrops carve paths down the windshield of his car. Water always found a way, through cracks, through dirt, through secrets buried in old riverbeds. And now it had brought him here. He drove north, following a winding 2-lane road that led out of town. His destination, the site where Tom's truck had been found. The rain had swelled the river slightly, But the ground beneath the bed was still firm from years of drought. Beneath the mud, beneath the silence of the trees, Rourke believed something was waiting. Deputy Hanson met him there with a small excavation team, two local contractors and a geologist from the Forestry Service. They came equipped with sonar tools, shovels, and curiosity. "We'll grid the area around where the truck was," Hanson said. "If there's anything else buried here, we'll find it." Rourke nodded. "Look for disturbed soil, unnatural formations, anything metallic or organic. We're not just looking for evidence. We're looking for another body. Because if Jacob Mills was the man found in the driver's seat, killed with a blow from behind, then the possibility remained. Tom had died here too, just not in the truck, or someone had made it look that way." 2 hours into the search, the forestry geologist called out, "Something's here." They gathered around a narrow patch of earth just 30 feet from where the truck had been. Using ground penetrating radar, he pointed to an abnormal shape, roughly 6 feet long, narrow at one end, human-shaped. "Could be a root tangle," the man said. "Or—" Rourke didn't wait. He ordered a careful dig. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of shovels scraping through damp soil. Then, the unmistakable sound of metal hitting something hollow. The contractors knelt down and brushed away the mud. It was a cooler, a large green Coleman hunting cooler, sealed tight. It looked old but intact, despite years underground. Rourke stepped forward and opened it himself, his gloves slick with mud. The hinges creaked and the lid lifted. Inside were bones, wrapped in a deteriorated sleeping bag. The skull had a bullet hole in the forehead. No ID. No clothing other than a shredded hunting jacket. But there was a watch, cracked, with a leather band worn to the thread. Rourke picked it up, his chest tight. He'd seen that watch in a photo in Lauren's kitchen. Tom Granger. He wasn't missing anymore. He was murdered. Back at the lab, the bones were confirmed through dental records. Tom's remains had been stored, preserved, and buried, like someone had taken their time. But the wound told the story. A single bullet to the head, execution style. Rourke listened to the voice recorder again that night. Jacob threatening Tom. Tom refusing to give him something. And then, silence. Tom didn't kill Jacob. Tom died shortly after that recording, which meant the person who killed Jacob also buried Tom. Hid the truck, erased everything. But why? He pulled the full financials from Tom's old bank accounts. At first glance, everything seemed routine. Paychecks from the auto shop, payments on a mortgage, school fees. Then he found it. A single withdrawal. $8,000 in cash. Just 2 weeks before his disappearance. Where had that money gone? He cross-checked the withdrawal with security footage from the bank. It showed Tom alone collecting the money. But the teller recalled something strange. She told Rourke he looked nervous, asked for it in small bills, told me he was going on a trip and needed cash in case of emergencies. Rourke pulled records on Jacob Mills. He'd been arrested for assault, petty theft, and, more importantly, blackmail. In 2009, Jacob had served time for threatening a man over a business deal gone wrong. His MO was always the same: get close, find the weakness, exploit it. Rourke returned to Lauren's home. She answered the door in the same calm, practiced way. "I found Tom," he said, without preamble. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "In a cooler," he continued, "buried near the truck. He was executed." She leaned on the doorframe, as though the words had knocked the breath from her lungs. "I thought I was ready," she whispered. "But I'm not." Rourke studied her carefully. Jacob didn't kill Tom. He was dead shortly after that tape. Someone else pulled the trigger. Lauren said nothing. "I think Tom was blackmailed. I think Jacob wanted money to keep quiet about the affair. Or maybe something worse." He watched her face for even the smallest flicker. And he got one. Just a hint. But it was there. "He never told me about money," she said quietly. "But you knew about the affair," Rourke replied. "You said you suspected." Her eyes locked onto his. "He was my husband. And Jacob was a threat," Rourke said. "A man who showed up at your house, threatened your marriage, then disappeared along with your husband. What would you do if you had the chance to stop someone like that?" I didn't kill anyone, Mr. Rourke. Maybe not, he said, but you might know who did. That night, Rourke sat alone in his motel room. He pinned photos to the wall. Tom, Jacob, Lauren, Danny. He added a new one. Sheriff Dale Kinney. He made the map, tracked movements, dates, alibis. Then the final piece fell into place. The bullet that killed Tom had a partial serial number etched into it, standard issue for law enforcement ammunition. Only two people had access to that type of round in 2013 in Elk Ridge. Sheriff Kinney and his deputy, Lauren's brother, Deputy Mike Rollins. A man who, by all accounts, had always hated Tom. A man who'd been assigned to the search party that never found the truck. And a man who, if protecting his sister meant killing a blackmailer and covering up a messy affair, might have seen himself as the only solution. Rourke made the call. It was time to confront the man who knew where every body in Elk Ridge was buried. The old barn sat at the edge of town, just past where the pavement gave up and turned into dirt. It belonged to Deputy Mike Rollins, a man Rourke had met only briefly during his first week in Elk Ridge. Back then, Rollins had been quiet, cooperative, and unremarkable. A longtime deputy, born and raised in town, respected enough to never be questioned. Too hard, but Rourke now knew better. The sheriff's department records showed that Rollins had led the quadrant search near Black Hollow during the original manhunt, the one area that came up empty, a section that would have brought them within half a mile of the dried riverbed where Tom's truck was hidden. He had walked right past it, or more likely, made sure no one else found it. Rourke parked his car just beyond the tree line and approached the barn on foot. It was early evening, and the sky had turned a dull gray, thick with the weight of something waiting to break. The wind carried the smell of hay, oil, and old secrets. The barn door creaked open when Rourke knocked. Inside, Rollins was stacking feed sacks into a metal bin. He looked up slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Well," Rollins said, "I figured you'd come eventually. That makes this easier," Rourke replied. Rollins leaned against the workbench, not bothering to offer a seat. "You here to ask me something, or just talk in circles until I crack?" "I found Tom." The words landed like a hammer on dry wood. Rollins's jaw clenched, but his eyes stayed steady. "Where?" "Buried. In a cooler. Not far from where Jacob Mills was found. One bullet to the head." Still, Rollins said nothing. "Law enforcement issue round," Rourke continued. "Same partial serials as the department uses. Not sold to civilians. Not even easy to steal." Rollins shrugged. "A lot of cops carry off books, especially out here." "Sure," Rourke said, "but only two had access in 2013, Sheriff Kinney and you." A long pause. The wind outside moaned through the loose siding. "What are you saying, Rourke?" "I think Jacob Mills blackmailed Tom. I think Tom went out there to pay him off, maybe to scare him off. But Jacob wasn't scared. He wanted more. Threatened Tom, threatened Lauren." He took a step closer. "And I think Lauren told you." Rollins looked away for the first time. That was all the confirmation Rourke needed. "You followed them," Rourke pressed. "You waited. You saw Jacob attack Tom. Maybe you stopped him. Maybe you didn't. But afterward, you made a choice. You killed Jacob, hid the body, buried Tom to protect your sister, to protect your family." Rollins stared at the ground. "I didn't plan it," he said finally. "Didn't even know where they'd gone until I tracked Jacob's car off the ridge. I found the truck, heard them yelling." He paused, then added quietly, "Jacob had Tom on his knees, gun to his head, said he was going to break the truth wide open, that Lauren would be ruined. The boys would grow up knowing their father cheated and lied." "So you shot him," Rourke said. "No," Rollins whispered. "I shot Tom." Silence fell. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. "I thought Jacob was about to do it," Rollins said, voice cracking. "I had a clear shot. I fired. He flinched, ducked. Tom didn't." Rourke felt the air leave his lungs. "I froze," Rollins said, his eyes red now. "Jacob ran. I chased him, tackled him, beat him until he stopped moving. Just stopped." He wiped his face with a trembling hand. "I didn't mean to kill him. I didn't mean any of it. But I couldn't leave Tom there. Couldn't explain it. So I cleaned up, buried the bodies, drove the truck off-road until it disappeared, hid everything. And Lauren? Rourke asked. She doesn't know, he said, almost pleading. She thought Tom ran, thought maybe someone else had killed him. I let her believe that. Told her the search turned up nothing. Kinney helped keep the file quiet. Rourke nodded slowly. I get why you did it, he said, but that doesn't make it right. Rollins didn't fight when the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He didn't even look surprised. As Rourke walked him to the car, the first drops of rain began to fall. Back in town, Rourke sat across from Lauren Granger in her quiet kitchen. Her boys were upstairs. The wood stove burned low. He told her everything. She didn't cry, didn't speak at first, just stared at the photograph of Tom on the wall. You said Mike confessed? She asked softly. Rourke nodded. It was an accident, he said, but he covered it up, and that made it murder. She exhaled slowly. He thought he was protecting me. Were you protecting him too? No, she said, but I've always known something terrible happened out there. I just couldn't admit it. If I admitted it, I had to live with it. She looked up at Rourke. And now I do. 3 days later, Deputy Mike Rollins was formally charged with second-degree murder and obstruction of justice. Sheriff Kinney, under state investigation, resigned from his advisory role and retreated from public life. Tom Granger was laid to rest in Elk Ridge Cemetery next to an empty plot he'd once reserved for Lauren. A crowd of over 200 came to the service. Hunters, mechanics, friends, and strangers who had only known his name whispered in stories. Rourke stood in the back, his hands in his coat pockets. Rain tapped his shoulders, soft and steady, washing away a decade of silence. The truth, as always, had found a way out, but it had taken blood, bone, and years of grief to surface. The headlines read like closure. Cold case solved after 10 years. Deputy confesses in hunting trip murder. Elk Ridge finds answers as long-missing Tom Granger lay to rest. The town buzzed with stories, half-facts retold at the diner, whispered at church, dissected at the antler's tooth over shots of whiskey. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone knew someone who'd once known Tom. In Elk Ridge, the truth was never just what happened. It was what people agreed to remember. Rourke stayed in town longer than he usually would. The case was officially closed, the report filed, the charges laid, but something still nagged at him. It wasn't the evidence. He was satisfied with that. It wasn't Rollins' confession either. The man had told the truth, at least most of it. No. What troubled Rourke was the story everyone now believed. The neat version, the simple version, the version where a man made a mistake, tried to cover it up and paid the price, where a woman mourned with dignity, where justice eventually came knocking. But real stories aren't neat, and this one still had frayed edges. Rourke sat alone in the sheriff's office late one night, flipping through the original case files again. A coffee gone cold at his elbow, and the only light coming from a green-shaded desk lamp. He reread the timeline. October 3rd, 2013, Tom Granger leaves town for a hunting trip. October 5th, last known sighting of Jacob Mills, reportedly at a gas station on Route 9. October 6th, unconfirmed gunshots reported near Black Hollow, not investigated. October 7th, Lauren reports Tom missing. October 8th, Deputy Rollins organizes the first search team. October 10th, Sheriff Kinney declares, no signs of foul play. He stared at that last line. No signs of foul play. Despite the missing man, despite the history between Tom and Jacob, despite the fact that the sheriff had let Danny Moore's statement go unrecorded and had silenced Lauren from the start. Was that incompetence, or was it something else? The next morning, Rourke drove to the senior center on the south edge of town. Sheriff Kinney was living in a small apartment there, part of the assisted living wing, after stepping down. He found the old sheriff seated on a bench by the garden, feeding birds with a paper bag of crumbs. You here to tell me I was right all along? Kinney asked without looking up. No, Rourke said. I'm here to ask what you were protecting. Kinney chuckled. Still fishing, huh? Rourke sat beside him. Rollins confessed, said he meant to shoot Jacob, Accidentally hit Tom. But there's something about that night that doesn't add up. Kinney tossed another handful of crumbs. You mean how a green deputy managed to cover up two bodies, hide a truck, and leave no trace, all without help? Rourke nodded. Kinney sighed. Mike called me that night, told me there'd been an accident, said Tom was dead. I drove out there, helped bury the truck. It wasn't about covering up murder. It was about protecting Lauren, protecting the boys. You ever stop to think the best way to protect them was to tell the truth? Rourke asked. Kinney looked out at the trees. Truth destroys people, Rourke. Sometimes it's a gift. Most times it's a wrecking ball. I figured if we kept quiet, the pain would fade. But it didn't. He turned to face Rourke. Don't let this town rewrite what happened. Don't let them say Tom was just a cheating husband who got what he deserved. He was a good man, flawed, but good. And he died trying to protect his family. Rourke stood. So why didn't you? Kinney didn't answer. Later that week, Rourke visited Danny Moore one final time. She'd packed her things, planning to leave Elk Ridge for good. They're still talking about him at the bar, she said. Some say he ran. Others say Lauren found out and had him taken care of. Neither's true, Rourke said. But truth doesn't matter much once people start talking. Danny looked out the window. He wasn't going to leave her. That was just something he told himself. And me. I think he was scared. Of Jacob? Of everything. The affair, the money, the lies. He wasn't built for that kind of life. It broke him down. Rourke nodded. He tried to do the right thing at the end. Danny looked at him, tears forming. He really did. On his last night in Elk Ridge, Rourke walked the trail near Black Hollow. The sky was heavy with stars, the pines whispering secrets in the breeze. He stopped by the dried riverbed. The truck was gone now, hauled out, impounded, stored as evidence. But the ground still bore the scars of what had been buried there. He knelt, ran a hand through the dirt, and whispered the name that had haunted this place for a decade. Tom. Then he stood and looked into the woods, the place where a man disappeared, where a secret died, where truth finally came home. The snow came early that year. By the time Samuel Rourke returned to Elk Ridge in late November to testify at the pretrial hearing, the pines were tipped in white and the mountain air bit through wool coats. It was the kind of cold that seemed to freeze memory in place, the kind that made people quiet. The town was different now, quieter, like it had finally exhaled after 10 years of holding its breath. The headlines were gone, reporters moved on, and yet something hung in the air like unfinished business. Rourke stood alone in the courtroom that morning, watching as Deputy Mike Rollins was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and chained wrists. He looked older, thinner, but he held his head high. Lauren was not in the gallery. She hadn't attended any of the hearings. When Rourke took the stand, he told the truth. All of it. The threats, the blackmail, the affair, the gunshot that was never meant for Tom, the long, deliberate cover-up, the silence of men who thought they were protecting a family when really they were burying it. He described the voice recording, the unearthed truck, the hunting cooler in the dirt, and the small, scratched-up wrist watch that told them everything they needed to know. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge called for a recess. Rollins was returned to holding. No outbursts, no denials. Just a slow sinking into consequence. Afterward, Rourke took a slow drive out of town. But instead of heading to the highway, he turned north, back to Black Hollow, the place where it all began. He parked at the trailhead and walked in alone. The snow muffled everything. Footsteps, birds, even breath. The old path was still clear, but the truck's tire marks were long gone, swallowed by the forest. At the riverbed, he found a simple wooden cross, planted in the earth. It hadn't been there before. Someone had marked the spot. There were no flowers, just a name carved into the wood with a hunting knife. Rourke stood there for a long time. The snow fell gently around him, silent as ash. He thought of Lauren, what she'd endured, what she'd lost, and what she had never allowed herself to say aloud, that she still loved him, that he was still her Tom. He thought of the boys, of what they'd grow up to learn, that their father had flaws, that he made mistakes, but he never gave up, And in the end, he stood up for them, even when it cost him everything. Rourke reached into his coat and pulled out the voice recorder, the one found in the truck, cleaned and restored. He crouched down, placed it gently at the base of the cross, and pressed play one final time. Tom's voice spilled out into the snowy woods. You already got what you wanted. Not everything. I told you. I want the rest. You're not walking out of these woods, Tom. And then the crack, the breath, the scuffle, and silence. Rourke let it finish, then turned it off. He left it there, tucked under the cross. Let the woods keep it. Let the truth echo a while longer.